Okay, so how many people here are fans of HTML5? So that's good. How about native apps? Apps in stores? Okay, cool. So we're going to be talking to both the audience. So first of all, why Intel and why HTML5? It's a question that I constantly get. One of the most important things is being able to address HTML5 developers. Intel is interested in developing and in helping developers. So that's the part of the organization that I come from the Intel Software organization, is to help developers create applications and create the ecosystem and create tools that will help in this process. So that's one of the things that I'm going to be talking about. Focus on the fact that HTML5 is, we already heard today, is it's quite capable of creating virtual reality and augmented reality apps. I will also talk about another standard called Cordova, which creates a class of APIs, and you can define your own APIs to access the native layers where HTML5 may not be something that will allow you to do that. One example is doing push notification, for example, came up recently, or also be able to access some native device features that are not already exposed in HTML5. So what Intel XDK does, that I will go through in here, is that you'll be able to use standard HTML5 and then also use Cordova with it. Okay. So first, let's go through and see why HTML5 is compelling. First, it's cross-platform. One important thing in here is that when people think of cross-platform, we think of browsers. That's very important. But there's just been a very good support for HTML5 for what's called Webview. So Webview is, think of your native app, and then you can have a view, and that renders HTML5 as part of your native app. So essentially, that's what Cordova enables you to access. The really interesting things we're going to go through is on iOS. I don't know if you're following. So WK Webview was released, and that has very good support for WebRTC, WebGL, and the most recent HTML5. With the Intel XDK, we also distribute a runtime called the Crosswalk project. What Crosswalk project is based off of the Blink runtime engine from Google, and we also add additional features to it. So essentially, if you have an Android 4.2 or newer device, essentially you'll be able to get the kind of compatibility that you'd come to expect off of a Chrome Blink engine. And that also gives you, in addition to HTML5 compatibility, it also gives you performance, right? So this is Webview done right. So, and now you have a rich ecosystem of not just web apps, but also apps that can be supported across iOS and Android and clearly also Windows. So what's so cool about HTML5 again is the huge community. You can go search on GitHub, or it's just such a huge sharing community, very welcoming licenses for developers to build off of each other's expertise and push the technology and user experience forward. Also, HTML5 allows edit, refresh, and it lets you see results quickly. One thing that I wanted to talk about is it's a little bit challenging, used to be challenging for developers if you had native apps, right? So with Intel XDK, we have an app in the store called App Preview. So what you do is you go to either your iOS store or your or the Google Play Store, and then you download the App Preview app. And what that is as you're starting to develop your application with the Intel XDK, you can preview it. You can do live preview. So it's just as you want to be able to develop your app such that you are doing this with HTML5, but then you can now also access Cordova technology using App Preview to preview the app. And I'll also go through and show you how you can then take this and then package this application and publish it to the store as well. So we did talk about Crosswalk, so to bring native features, HTML5 features to native apps. So we go through that in a bit more detail. So hybrid apps. So what are some of the things that you get through hybrid apps? The most popular downloads, if you go to Cordova plugins.io, plugins Cordova.io, you would notice that accelerometer, camera, compass, some of the basic native layer access that's while it's possible through HTML5, developers find it much more consistent. Now you have a choice. You can use HTML5 or you can also use native layers, compass, contacts, geolocation, notification storage. There's numerous things that you can access as part of your native layer. Actually, I should say here that Cordova 5.0 was recently announced, so we're going to be supporting Cordova 5.x API powered apps with the Intel XDK. Another thing that's really cool about Cordova and also Intel XDK is you can write your native application and then use the standard Cordova API to extend and create a JavaScript interface. And from that point onward, everybody that uses your software will be using this JavaScript interface once you're able to publish it. So it's just then the distribution is also very smooth and widely available. And with the Intel XDK, then you can not only distribute your native layers that other JavaScript users are able to access, you're also able to write applications that accesses native layers created by other developers. So that's a very rich and rich ecosystem that you can plug into. Okay. So what does it take for a basic virtual reality app, right? So one of the most important things you probably want for 3D is to see if you want to get stereoscopic rendering. It's pretty proven right now. So I have a few examples in here, and then I have the links that'll be part of the published list in here. So for stereoscopic rendering, I think we're going to be going into more detail with WebGL. 3JS forms a layer on top of WebGL that gives you JavaScript level access. And so there are several examples that are available on the web that you can take advantage of. You can combine that with camera, right? So HTML5 now supports a very good support for what's called tweening and transitioning. So you get very smooth rendering with animation. So there's several, it's called Penner equations that are supported pretty natively now across devices. It's widely used. So you can get stereoscopic rendering. Second important thing is being able to track head, right? So one of the apps, if you search for Intel XDK and Google Cardboard, one of the first links that you get is called X Cardboard Project. Was created by Gregor Biswanger. And one of the nice things about that is it uses XDK, but it really leverages Google's Cardboard interface. So using Cordova and the XDK, you can push native features to the JavaScript level, so your application is as easy as writing an HTML5 application, but your capability is taking advantage of your native applications. And notice though that Cordova came off of an effort called PhoneGap, which was initially created to say, okay, there's a gap between what native layers have and what HTML5 have, and let's bridge them. What was the concept behind PhoneGap. But the open source equivalent of that is Cordova, right? So developers are now having access to both native and HTML5 features. I guess I've said that several times, but that's the important thing, right? So being able to have a full slew of features, but with the ease of development of HTML5. And third thing is, for example, NFC. With Google Cardboard, they have this little magnet that you can that does the NFC, and then you can also have a Cordova layer that could possibly access that. And upcoming specs, other speakers are probably going to refer to WebVR and MozVR. This is really exciting times ahead. I just want to put that in there, but there's just a lot of neat things happening. So stereo 3D rendering is, you can notice in here, so there's Stereo essentially means that your screen is divided into two, and your left eye and your right eye sees different viewports, right? So what's happening in here in this application that you can demo today, can you see today is, so you have WebGL, it's a solar system, and it's actually integrated with a camera. And when you track your head, camera tracks that, and then it's as if you have a solar system augmented into your camera environment is what this demo is showing. And this takes advantage of several things that I mentioned earlier, which is clearly WebGL, right, to be able to do 3D stereo viewport. It includes tweening for very smooth transitions. If you watch this, all of the planets are very smoothly spinning, and then that's rendered right on top of a camera, and it works on most 4.2 or 5.0 Android or iOS devices. Works very nicely, and then also orientation APIs. Another thing that I wanted to talk about, Webview. So right now, I think we mentioned that with Crosswalk project and also WK Webview with iOS 8, all of those very new. If you haven't looked at it, the amount of support that you get as of today is quite significant. You have a very large market you could reach by having Webview as well as writing web apps that run on browsers. We did mention Three.js, which is a JavaScript interface on top of WebGL. It's possibly the most widely used a library, very well written, very well documented, numerous examples. Definitely give a shout out to Three.js library. I also want to call out a couple of additional developments. There's a company called Play Canvas. They're creating a GUI written on top of WebGL, so it's a drag and drop UI. If you search for Intel XDK and Play Canvas, you'll find documentation on Play Canvas where it's a drag and drop UI, and then you use Intel XDK to package it into an app. Okay, device orientation. You can access either the gyro or the accelerometer. There's standards available for both. You could either use the Cordova device orientation. I have a couple of examples in here. One of that on GitHub is very cool to use just plain HTML5, and you could do device orientation. In this example that I'm showing here, this is part of Xcardboard. And in fact, if you look at the implementation, it uses Angular, but for display, uses Bootstrap. It's really as simple as having two columns, and you have images going on the left and the right-hand side. You get stereo display. And then also W3C device orientation is now in editor's draft. But again, the standards are relentlessly moving toward making the components available for virtual reality. Going to a little bit more about how Intel XDK works. By the way, you go to xdk.intel.com. It's a free product. It runs on Windows. It runs on iOS, also on Linux. You download Intel XDK. It comes with an ability for you to code. So you can, on the left-hand side, you're noticing in here, you can code it. There's also a drag and drop and also a built-in text editor based off of the brackets, JavaScript editor. And you can test your app. So we have an emulator for Cordova API. So it has a little small thing that you're seeing in here is an accelerometer emulator, or you can also do geolocation maps. So you can test your apps right in the emulator. But even more interestingly, you can also debug your application on your phone. So as you're developing, like I showed you the app preview, then you'd be able to run it on the phone. And then the next step would be, assuming your application is working nicely, you can share it across devices. Yeah, you can build it to use either Crosswalk for Android. So that's what I have at the bottom part of the screen. So you can use Crosswalk for Android, or Android use the native Webview iOS, or also Windows 8. And the point here is that you can write once and publish to multiple places, deploy across many form factors. So that's one nice thing about HTML5 is responsive design has really matured to a point where you have best known methods and practices that you can rely upon, so you don't have to start from scratch, where you're able to deploy across multiple form factors and get the responsiveness. And what the Intel XDK does is it now lets you not only use HTML5 in a browser, but also in an app. With that, I have several references in here, and these, all of the products that are on the right-hand side are game engines that are supported in the Intel XDK. So if you go to xdk.intel.com, you have links to using all of these engines with the XDK. Construct 2 is also an awesome 2D game engine, but also has WebGL support. It has a programming language. It's very cool if you haven't checked this out. Phaser and Pixie.js and Easel JS, Cocos 2D are all very popular HTML5 engines that you can use with the Intel XDK. And a couple other links that I want to call in here is the Google Cardboard demo, and then also sorry, I meant to say HTML5 solar system demo, the last link in here. So with that, I'm open to taking questions.
As you go through Cordova layer from native to JS funking layer, wouldn't that have some performance issues? And specifically if the AR experience you're trying to provide and the latency that is like one of the complaints that is constantly here.
So the question is, when you go from the Cordova layer through the JavaScript layer, are there performance impacts, especially if there is latency, and then there's the importance of latency. So there are a couple of different things to think about in here. WebGL does not need to run through Cordova, so WebGL directly goes into your rendering layer. Where you probably want, like I pointed out, a majority of the uses of Cordova is to access the native widget, in this case, say, for example, camera. So, and at the point, the native application takes over. So you, for example, on Android, you would issue an intent. So you would use Cordova to issue the intent. So the most well-used Cordova best-known methods involve accessing device features to a point where you hand over control to the device, and as far as the developer user experience is concerned, they're using using that device. And for example, if you use camera, it's native camera experience. And once you take a picture with the camera, in fact, that's one of the things, right? You just want to say, just take a picture, right? So it's really as easy as a JavaScript call. You make it call take a picture. And once the picture is taken, then you then have access to the picture that was taken, the camera roll, and then you can work with it. Make sense? Okay. Other questions?
What really the Intel XDK brings to the table? Actually, I understand the Cordova helps to package your the web app as a mobile app, and package helps for the IDE environment. For
Correct.
building.
Yeah.
And Intel XDK brings any augmented reality kind of APIs to develop, or what exactly Intel XDK complements?
The question is Intel XDK bringing any specific APIs to the picture? Intel XDK is the development and the build environment. So what Intel XDK does is on the build side, when you say build me an application, Intel XDK has on the build side, we have build server setup for iOS and Android or multiple, so that saves you the effort of setting this up locally. And so what you do then is it's more making your development experience easier. your testing experience easier. So with the Intel XDK app preview application, you are able to test your applications as you're building it, and not just the web applications, but also your Cordova application. The emulator helps you test it. Intel XDK also offers you a profiler to give you performance information. And the thing is, it's not just the performance on your web browser. In many cases, you have a very powerful system. It works nicely. You want to find out the performance on your phone or tablet, and Intel XDK gives you a profiler, native profiler, that helps you do that. So think of the Intel XDK as a development environment, and then if we have APIs to the extent that it would be supportive of developers' needs, but we'd like to support multiple XDK, multiple SDKs. Wikitude, for example, has a very nice description on how to use XDK with the Wikitude SDK. There are some Cordova issues which we would like to resolve and make that process easier. So Intel XDK process is going to be working with the community to make it easier to take the APIs that the community would create and make that more easy to package and deliver.
So is it something like a phone gap build system? Like
It could be, you could think of that as the equivalent of the phone gap build system, but then we also have a user interface where with selecting your APIs is much simpler and easier than that. Thank you. Do I have time for other questions? Or?
See your time. Are there any other questions?
Are there any other questions? I guess we're done. Thank you.